course, this weekend is the time when the US are celebrating Thanksgiving, but I think every week we should celebrate the fact that we're in the greatest country in the world. And I celebrate every Saturday that I get the opportunity to come in and talk sport, which is something that's a real passion of mine. I get to talk to some wonderful people and celebrate some wonderful achievements, and I'm always grateful for that. But joining me now is, she's not the Grinch, but she's a Griswold. Jo Lukens, how are you?
Good morning, Gran. I'm very well, thank you.
You got a lovely shirt on there.
I do. I've got my Christmas shirt out. It's the 1st of December, and my shirt says, "In a world full of Grinches, be a Griswold." So I'm a Griswold today, as I will be all the way through December.
And Ray's saying to me, I've got something wrong with the microphones there, but I don't think I have.
I can see a light that says "mic mute."
Yeah, I know, he's correcting you, but I pointed out before you shouldn't correct on air because you said it was the 1st of December and he said it's not till tomorrow.
Oh.
There's a Grinch for you.
Oh, goodness me.
Very me.
I'm going out to get a new Christmas tree today, so it feels like the 1st of December.
So, Jo, gratitude is something that I think sits in everybody's life, and it's easy to find the things that challenge us. They star out before us. But sometimes we're not always there and present to think about the things that we could be grateful for. And these are the things that actually put the smile on our face.
They absolutely do. And you're right. Your first point that you made is there's no doubt that humans do tend to suffer from what we call a negativity bias. And some people argue that's evolutionary. You know, look out for what's going to go wrong. That's what's helped keep us alive. But what we do know consistently through the research is that there is real benefits for us in our well-being and our happiness when we include gratitude in our lives, and then moving on to what we're going to be talking about today, what we're now seeing about gratitude in relation to performance. So it's certainly something worthy of our attention.
And you're right, and I think it is true, you know, and I'm not a scientist in this area, but that evolutionary part of us, that risk awareness, and sometimes risk awareness becomes risk aversion, which becomes a fear or an apprehension, rather than an alertness. And I say to my staff, I say to my players that risk actually presents an opportunity, because risk in itself says that there's another option, and it reminds us that there's options, not just to step away from something. Sometimes it's stepping towards a risk to treat it and move on. And I think that when we get into that space, we can look at things from a negative viewpoint, and I think it's really important that we try and find the positives. So what are some of the tips when we start to look at that and we start to look at opportunity?
Yeah, well, so with gratitude, I mean, what we know, exactly as you said, is that even when we're in a risky situation, and that's maybe where we want to provide ourselves with a little bit of cautious optimism rather than being, you know, she'll be right, which is an Australian tendency as well. But what we know is that optimism and finding the good is predictive of success across many domains of life. So when it comes to our health, when it comes to our relationships, students who are studying, when it comes to work performance, all of those areas, there's consistent research that supports that when we choose to view the world through a positive lens, you know, working out what's going to go well, then that tends to forebode well for us in terms of those things that we're actually engaging with. And we know that when we have that negative mindset, you know, what you see is what you get. So it's no surprise then that perhaps the person that expects the worst receives the worst.
And in sport, and if we take it to a sporting framework, a lot of times, and I think as a coach, and I look at some of my times as a coach, you can start a conversation with don't do this rather than do that. And I recall to a conversation that somebody referred to me and said, think about this, if you're standing at the tee, first tee, and you're about to tee off in golf, and your caddy says now, not that I've ever been good enough to have a caddy, but caddy says now, whatever you do, there's trees down the left-hand side, don't hit left. So you're thinking, okay, I've got to hit right. But the mind's saying, don't hit left, don't hit left. And that at some point converts to hit left.
Well, it absolutely does, because the brain doesn't actually hear don't. It just hears trees or left. And I can remember years ago, I don't pretend to know a lot about boxing, but I worked with a boxer and was struggling at the start of his fights because he would end up on the ropes. And it turned out the very last thing that his trainer would say to him as he stepped into the ring was stay off the ropes. So, of course, you know, all I had to do was say to the trainer, I understand you want him to stay off the ropes, but what do you actually want him to do? And he said, well, I just want him to stay in the middle. And, you know, I always think that was the easiest money I ever earned, because he said stay in the middle and he stayed in the middle. So, you know, it's really important for all of us to remember that when we're instructing someone, tell them what you want to see, what you want them to do, Because if you say to someone, don't drop the ball, that's exactly what they're going to do. And so what you need to say to them is, catch the ball or good hands or whatever it is. If you had a 3-year-old in front of you carrying a glass of water, you say don't spill it, and then you're surprised why there's water on the floor. So it's very important to put the positive image, what you want to see, into someone's head.
Yeah, carry it carefully.
Yes.
Joe, I want to refer to your book a little bit because, and I want to talk about it. And it has come out, and it's a great read. And it's called The Elite. And Think Like an Athlete, Succeed Like a Champion. But there's so many stories in sport and aspects of sport that we've talked about in the show at different stages that really reflect life. And I often refer back to sporting analogies for myself, whether they're experiences or observed experiences, when I talk to people about life. And I think that there are, in a lot of ways, sport can present as a microcosm of a range of things that happen. But I look at one of the chapters, and it's an early chapter, and it talks about the mindset, and it talks about a master plan around the mindset. And you open with a quote that comes from Muhammad Ali, and it says, "If my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it." And I think that that's a great quote. But in amongst there, when you talk about performance thinking and things in life, you talk about fixed thinking and performance thinking. And specifically in sport, you say, I'm just bad at it and I don't care. Whereas performance thinking says, it doesn't seem to be a priority for me right now. And the next one is, I'm never going to be able to jump higher than 1.8 metres. Whereas the performance thinking says, I haven't learned how to jump that high yet. And the final one is, I'd really like to learn to skip, but I just can't. And the performance thinker says, I'd like to learn to skip through, though I haven't started yet.
I do love the power of the word yet. And I think that what it does is, as you said, with performance thinking,
it talks about opportunity.
We entertain the possibility. So there's plenty of things, I personally could write a long list of the things that I'm currently not able to do. And notice even there how I worded it, currently not able to do. And then it's just a question of whether or not it is a priority for me and whether it's something that I want to learn. Now that doesn't mean that I master everything, and I'm not sure how conceivable it is that 1.8 metres is going to be something that I'm going to achieve. But again, it's certainly never going to happen if I have a fixed mindset. So we know that when we have that fixed negative mindset, we essentially put brick walls around ourselves, and we're never going to achieve those things.
So how much of that positive mindset starts with a gratitude in the first place, to being grateful that A, I've got the opportunity to be able to do the things I can do, and B, I'm grateful for the fact that I'm at this level now, and I'm grateful that I've got an opportunity to progress?
Absolutely. For me, and for the work that I've done, whether it be with individual athletes or it's been with teams, I think gratitude is your foundation. That when you can travel through the world with a gratitude mindset, I really do think it opens up the possibilities for you. And I've had instances time and time again where athletes have entered a competition, reflecting at some point in time prior to competition about the things that they're grateful for. And it's it's made it a much more positive experience for them. And what we know with athletes is athletes typically in any sport don't perform well when they're tight and they're anxious. When athletes are relaxed and they can move through the motions of whatever it is that their sport is, that seems to facilitate performance. And so when you think about the things that you're grateful for, and maybe even the listeners might like to do that now, if you either reflect on something you are grateful for right now, or someone you're grateful to for whatever reason, and when you sit and you think about those things, it kind of gives you a smile on the inside, is the way I like to describe it. And so what happens is, through that little moment of relaxation, it releases the tension, and then that sets you up well for performing well, particularly in a physical endeavour.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I listen to a number of the things that you've said. I listen to all the things you say. But the gratitude part's always struck with me. And I know we had a conversation some time back, and it talked about, at the end of the day, think about the things that you're grateful for on that day. And I often reflect as a young fellow, saying my prayers at the end of my bed, and they were always a gratitude statement and a thank you for the things I've got. And some way we've stepped away, I think, from some of that. Not saying that we've necessarily got to get everyone to say their prayers at the end of the bed, but I think it was a great learning lesson in life for me to be grateful for the things that were there before me and the opportunities that I had in life. And I think that's a nice thing. And I try and do it as well when things might be getting me down at work, or they're tough, or they're whatever. I go, okay, well, that might be tough now, but gee, I'm grateful that I've got these other things that support me and take me through. And if I take you to your book in chapter 10, which is the gratitude attitude, and I'll let you talk about it in a little bit, but Todd Blackadder made a quote that you've put in there. I told the players to see the simple act of signing an autograph as our commitment to the fans, that we would do our best as their representatives and that we fully appreciate their great support. If I've got a gripe about some of our athletes today, I think they forget that it is an opportunity they've got to perform and to be grateful to the fans and those around us. And I know Jonathan Thurston wrote the prelude to your book, or the what's it called, the forward to your book. He's a player who is always grateful. He gives out that hat. He thanks the ball boy. He gives them the kicking tee, and he examples gratitude, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I think in sport, it's easy just to say, yeah, I'm grateful for the check I get at the end of the day, rather than saying I'm really, truly grateful for those people that make my opportunity important. So what are some of the lessons for some of our athletes and some of the people around that you could draw on from your book?
Well, I think that message, as you said, is that people matter, and it's our relationships that are important. And I think that when we can walk into an endeavour grateful for the opportunity, it sets us up really well. And it's a win-win situation for everyone, because if those athletes who are grateful to the spectators, the coaches, the ground staff that prepare the fields that they're on and so forth, obviously the person receiving the thanks or the hat or whatever it is, that they get something from it and they get that recognition and the acknowledgement. So it's great for them. But it's also important for us to remember is it feels good to be grateful, and I don't think we should apologise for that either. So it's really one of those situations, and I think, teams and clubs, there's sponsors out there that look after you and all those sorts of things. And I think what I've seen in sport is that when teams have forgotten that, they've forgotten to be thankful, they've forgotten who put them there. It's always a win for everyone when we're grateful to the people that are around us. And you mentioned before, Grant, about saying your prayers at the end of the day, and certainly the gratitude research is consistent with that, is that at the end, those end moments, and I often say to people, if I'm working in a workplace, I'll say, if you drive a desk and you're tucking your chair in at the end of the day, as you're tucking your chair in, think about things that you're grateful for that happened today at work. You might have had a tough day, there might have been some moments, but if you're walking out of work thinking about, gee, I'm really glad that I was able to navigate that tricky conversation, or I secured that sale, or I got that project done, or whatever it was, when you walk out of work being grateful, and be grateful that you have that job, because there'd be plenty of people who would be, really seeking that opportunity. So we can do it at the end of the day. We can do it, I often do it in the car when I'm picking up the kids to school, because that's a transition point for me.
That you're grateful to be in that school parking zone and that opportunity to navigate.
Yes. and so there it is, isn't it? It's the challenge of the park. But do you know what? I am fortunate enough that I get to pick my kids up from school, and I know there'd be plenty of parents who would love that opportunity. So it's not forgetting any of those moments. And then at the end of the day, like you said, reflecting on and the research for those who are strapped for time, you only have to do it 3 times a week at night before you go to bed. 3 things that you're grateful for, and they don't have to be big things. Maybe someone made you a cup of coffee today, maybe someone held a door for you, maybe you saw a beautiful butterfly in the garden, or maybe something bigger happened. But stopping and reflecting on the good, because we know that when you look at the world that we're in, even if you look at the news, the ratio is about 17-1 in terms of negative news stories to positive ones. We have this constant diet of negativity, so we need to seek out the positive to counterbalance some of that, and to look after our general well-being. And it's as important for our athletes as it is for all of us.
I talked to Michael Clark the other day, and he said, I'm really disappointed with all of this sledging and the talk of the sledging again, and when are we going to get past that? I said, I've got to say, and I want to ask your thoughts about this, because sledging has always been a part of sport. It's part of any combative or contested environment. I think it's when it becomes unpleasant and personal that it's absolutely unnecessary. I think some lighthearted banter, sometimes trash talking your opponent when you're in a one-on-one is part of that psychological battle, whether you're across a net, whether you're standing side by side in the key way at basketball, whether you're at the start line of a race. I think that's part of the mental approach to getting either yourself in or others out. And I listened to some of the great trash talkers, and you mentioned Muhammad Ali in there. He was never personally negative about somebody else. He might have trash talked and talked around, but he was never personally negative about it. And I think we forget that. But the point I made to Michael Clark is, unfortunately, I think the media are grabbing hold of, they've got on-field microphones, they've got listening devices everywhere. they're portraying that. And you mentioned before the news, all the number of negative stories as opposed to positive. Gee, I wish that they'd find some positive stories to look at all the good things that are happening around. Don't just fish for the negative. And I think you'd find that people would pick up more papers and watch more TVs and listen to more reports if they were feeling that. And we'd have a far better society and a happier society reflecting on the good things.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree, because I do think, like that topic of sledging, every sport has its own line about what's acceptable and what's not. And like you said, so, you know, in the cricket, I think there's been some incredibly well-humoured comments that have been made over the years, and there'd be lots of classic comments there. And every sport varies, you know, so what it would be in swimming would be very different. So every sport almost has its own culture around communication between people, and like you say, it's whenever you cross whatever that line is going to be for that sport is when it really takes that unpleasant tone, and it loses the intelligence of the banter, I think, sometimes.
Dr. Jo Lukins, it's been an absolute pleasure having you in this morning. I'm very grateful for your presence here this morning. And the book's called The Elite. Succeed, think like an athlete and succeed like a champion. It is a very good read. It's a very easy read, and you don't have to read it in any order. And the thing I like about it, because I'm not a terrible reader, is it actually guides you through how to read it. So, Dr. Joanne Lukins, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thanks for your chat. And it is an opportunity for us to reflect, I think, as a region, how grateful we should be that we live in one of the best parts of the world.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks for the opportunity for coming in. I must have known you were seeking prizes for next week, because I do have a copy of the book here for you, and if anyone misses out, they can support our local booksellers and perhaps pop down to Maryhoo and have a little look at it.
Most certainly, it'll be there and available. I'm Grant Bell, Northern Grandstand. We're going to be back to talk cycling with Ruth Corset in just a moment.